I woke to the low hum of a machine and a ceiling I didn't recognize. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming until the ache in my ribs reminded me I wasn't. I'd been in a coma. 3 months, they would later tell me. But the first thing I saw wasn't a doctor or my family. It was an empty room. No dad, no brother, no one. Just a single folded note on the tray beside my bed. 5 words in my father's handwriting. We stopped paying. Good luck. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. The nurse told me later. I cried quietly the way people do when they're too weak to sob. I don't remember the time passing. All I remember is staring at that note, reading the 5 words over and over until they blurred. We stopped paying. Good luck. My father's handwriting, sharp and controlled the same handwriting he used to sign bonuses for people who barely knew him. Not the handwriting of a man who once carried me on his shoulders down our street in Seattle. Not the handwriting of someone who stayed. When I finally blinked the sting from my eyes, the silence around me felt heavier than the machines. I'd grown up fearing silence. In my house, silence wasn't peace. It was the warning before a storm. After my mother died when I was 18, silence became the language Veronica spoke fluently, cold, polished, calculated. She never yelled. She didn't need to. She could make you feel like you didn't exist just by turning away mid-sentence. My father absorbed it. My brother, Landon, mimicked it. And I learned to fill the silence with work. 15 years of building systems no one knew my name was behind. 15 years of ghostwriting proposals, designing frameworks, coding structure deep in the architecture, while Landon presented them to the board with a smile. It's a family effort, he'd say, tapping my shoulder on the way out of the room like that counted as acknowledgement. Meanwhile, my office was a converted storage closet on the lower floor. No windows, 2 flickering lights, a chair that leaned slightly to the left. I told myself it didn't matter as long as the work was good, as long as I knew the truth, as long as someone somewhere would eventually see me. But lying there in that hospital bed, ribs, aching lungs, burning with every breath, I finally understood what my mother must have felt near the end. She saw the truth years before I did. She saw how small they would try to make me, how easy it would be for them to erase the girl who looked too much like her. Maybe that was why she spent those long nights in her study with Daniel Price, leaving behind stacks of sealed envelopes I was too young to question. Maybe she knew I wouldn't be protected once she was gone. My breath hitched as the door clicked softly. A shadow moved. For a split second, hope flared, some foolish part of me still expecting my father. It wasn't him. A familiar voice broke the stillness. Caroline. It was steady, measured professional Daniel Price, my mother's estate lawyer, the last person I expected and the only person whose presence didn't make my chest tighten. He stepped inside with a careful gentleness as if approaching a wounded animal. Behind him stood a man I had never seen, tall, sharp suit, a posture that suggested he sized up every room before stepping into it. His gaze flicked over me, not with pity, but with recognition. Like he already knew who I was, or who I used to be. Daniel pulled a chair beside my bed. I'm glad you're awake. We've been waiting. Not my father, not my brother, not my stepmother, but Daniel and this stranger in a tailored jacket that didn't quite belong in a hospital room. My voice scraped out. Where's my family? A beat? Daniel's jaw tightened. The stranger's eyes lowered. No one spoke. I already knew the answer. Daniel cleared his throat. Caroline, this is Ethan Ward. He's been advising on certain matters regarding your mother's affairs. A subtle exchange of glances passed between them. Something coordinated, something urgent. Ethan stepped forward, offering a nod. I've reviewed everything connected to your work and your history with the company. I'm here because the next 72 hours will determine your future. I blinked, confused. My future? Daniel exhaled a slow, steady breath, the kind he used when preparing to deliver something heavy. Your father is planning a complete restructuring. The board meets in 3 days at the Tech Summit in San Francisco. As of this morning, he intends to remove you from all strategic authority. My pulse pounded in my ears. I don't have authority to remove. Ethan's expression didn't change. That's the point. They've been erasing your footprint for years. Your accident gave them an opportunity to finish the job. My fingertips curled into the sheet. Finish. Daniel reached into his briefcase, pulling out a set of neatly clipped papers face down. He hesitated before flipping the first page. Richard filed documents declaring you mentally incompetent. Permanent. He signed them yesterday. The room swayed. Ethan leaned in slightly. He expects you to be gone physically, legally, professionally, but he doesn't understand something. I lifted my eyes to him. His tone dropped steady, deliberate. He thinks you're powerless because you're lying in this bed. He thinks you don't matter. He thinks you won't fight. Daniel's voice followed calm but edged with something fierce. But Caroline, your father made a mistake. Daniel let the words hang in the air, watching my reaction carefully. I didn't move. I couldn't. My father had signed me out of my own life, erased me with the flick of a pen. But Daniel wasn't finished. He didn't just abandon you, Caroline, he said quietly. By declaring you incapacitated while you were still legally protected, he triggered the one clause your mother left behind. My breath caught. Clause Daniel nodded, opening a slim leather folder. Inside were a few sheets aged precise and unbearably familiar. My mother's handwriting curled at the bottom of one. She knew what might happen. He continued. She saw how things were shifting even before she got sick. She created a trust, one your father never had full access to, and tied its activation to a very specific condition. Ethan stepped closer, his voice calm but charged. Abandonment during medical incapacitation. If your father withdrew support in any form while you were unable to advocate for yourself, every asset your mother controlled would transfer to you. My ribs ached again, but differently this time, like something inside me was trying to ignite. Daniel tapped the papers lightly. Your father signed the refusal of medical responsibility 2 weeks ago. We have the written note he left beside your bed. That alone satisfies the condition. We stopped paying. Good luck. 5 words that broke me an hour ago, now stitched themselves back together into something sharp. What? Assets I managed. Ethan exchanged a look with Daniel. Then he answered bluntly, nearly $1 billion in combined holdings, and voting control tied to your mother's shares. The hospital room tilted, but not from weakness, from clarity. For the first time since waking, I felt my spine straighten against the pillows. My father thought he'd buried me. Instead, he dug his own grave. But a trust doesn't wipe away perception, Ethan continued. The board thinks you're still the girl in the converted storage office, the one doing back-end work no one sees. They won't accept your authority on trust alone. You need proof. You need a plan. Daniel closed the folder and slipped it back into his case. That's why we're here. You have 72 hours before the summit. If Richard announces the restructuring there, undoing it will become a nightmare. We have to move now. I swallowed hard. I can't even walk across the room. You don't need to, Ethan said. Not yet. You just need access. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed something small and heavy beside me. A security badge, my photo, my name, and an authorization level I'd never seen in my life. My mother. My voice was barely a whisper. Daniel gave a small, sad smile. She had it made years ago. She wanted you to have full access when the time came. She trusted you to do what she never could. I looked at the badge, the edges catching the thin hospital light. I wasn't powerless. I'd just been asleep. The suite overlooked downtown San Francisco, the city lights flickering like signals from another world, alive, indifferent, moving on without me. I sat on the edge of the bed while Ethan connected his laptop to a secure terminal Daniel had arranged. The glow from the screen washed over his face as lines of access logs and archived internal reports began pouring in. My mother built this, I whispered. Every line of it, Ethan said, and she left every door open for one person only, me. Even in my exhaustion, something tightened inside my chest, grief, pride, fury, all braided into one cold thread of resolve. We collected everything payment records tied to projects I had built drafts with my metadata task logs showing I'd completed workflows Landon claimed as his own and strategy models that matched my original structures. Hours slipped by, the sky turning from black to steel blue. Daniel stepped out to make calls, leaving Ethan and me in the hum of servers and quiet concentration. "You know what's going to happen when you walk out there, right?" Ethan said without looking up. "I know exactly what's going to happen." He finally met my eyes. "Good. They've underestimated you for years. Don't give them a second to recover." By sunrise, the war room walls were covered in sticky notes, printouts, and diagrams. A timeline of betrayal, a map of truth. And in the center, my mother's trust clause circled in red ink. 72 hours collapsed into preparation coordination and moments of stillness where I could almost hear my mother's voice. "Don't shrink for them, Caroline." She used to say that on late nights when I worked quietly at her desk while she coded beside me. "When people erase you, you don't disappear, you sharpen." By the morning of the summit, I was sharpened to a point. Daniel arrived first, straightening his tie as he walked in. "The board members we spoke to are ready," he said. "They won't act without you showing up in person. Richard has no idea." "Good," I said, slipping the badge into my pocket. "He doesn't deserve warnings." Downstairs, the hotel lobby buzzed with executives, analysts, reporters, people who had once walked right past me without a glance the same way my family did. I moved through the crowd silently, Daniel and Ethan flanking me like quiet sentinels. But before we reached the main hall, someone blocked our path. A tall man in a Navy uniform, the summit's head of security. His badge, Martin Cole. "Miss Mercer," he said softly. Daniel stiffened. Ethan narrowed his eyes. But Martin raised a hand. "I'm not here to stop you," he said. "I'm here to give you something." He reached into his jacket and handed me a small worn notebook, pages creased and covered in careful handwriting. "I work nights," he said. "For years I saw you in the building. You'd come in late, leave early, always alone. I kept notes because, well, someone should have." I flipped through it. Dates, times, rooms, observations, proof I existed in the shadows they forced me into. "Your brother was in Aspen the weekend he claimed he finished that defense project," Martin continued. "You were in the server room for 36 straight hours. I saw you." My throat tightened. "Why help me?" He gave a small shrug. "Because I've watched them steal from you long enough. And because my wife works in your R&D department. She says the company only holds together because of your work." I closed the notebook, feeling the weight of every word. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "Make them listen," he said. "Some of us always knew." He stepped aside and we continued. Inside the main hall, my father stood on stage under bright lights. His smile polished his posture perfect. Veronica sat in the front row, crossed legs, serene confidence radiating off her. Landon hovered near the podium, rehearsing whatever speech he was prepared to give once Dad announced the new leadership structure. I waited behind the side curtain, listening to the announcer call his name. "And now, our keynote speaker, Richard Mercer." Applause filled the room. My father stepped forward. This was his kingdom, his moment. I walked onto the stage. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. My father's smile dissolved. Veronica's hand flew to her chest. Landon went pale. What are you doing here?" Richard snapped, his voice cracking through the microphone. I reached for the second mic, my fingers steady. "Good morning." "This is inappropriate," he hissed. "You are not well." "No," I said, my voice amplifying across the hall. "What's inappropriate is declaring your daughter mentally incompetent while she's unconscious. What's inappropriate is abandoning her in a hospital bed to cut her out of the company she built with you." Murmurs erupted in the crowd. I pulled the folded note from my pocket, held it up. He left this beside my bed. 5 words. "We stopped paying. Good luck." I placed it on the podium. And that, I continued, activated my mother's trust. Daniel handed me the documents. Ethan cued the presentation. The screen behind us lit up with the incorporation papers showing Julia Hayes as the majority owner. A second slide displayed the trust clause. The third, the logs of my work matched against the projects Landon presented. My father lunged toward the podium. That information is private. No, I said calmly. It's true. More murmurs. Journalists whispering. Board members leaning forward. Then I opened Martin's notebook, and this, I said, is a record kept by someone with no stake in this fight, someone who saw everything you tried to erase. I met my father's eyes. For the first time in my life, he looked small. You forgot who I really am, I said softly, and what she, my mother, left me capable of. A board member stood. I moved for an immediate vote of no confidence. Hands went up across the room. It was over in less than 5 minutes. My father stayed frozen, staring at the floor as the board stripped him of authority. Veronica's face tightened, her poise slipping. Landon's bravado cracked completely. I stepped back from the mic as the applause shifted not for me, but for truth finally landing where it belonged. And for the first time since waking up, I felt alive. When the board adjourned, the room emptied slowly like people were afraid to move too quickly around the ruins of my family. Richard sat in the front row long after the last executive left. No one approached him, not even Veronica. Landon disappeared first, shoulders hunched, avoiding every pair of eyes that followed him out. I didn't say a word to any of them. There was nothing left to say. Daniel and Ethan walked with me through the quiet corridor behind the stage. The tension that had held my spine rigid for days finally began to loosen. I hadn't won a battle, I had simply returned everything to its rightful owner. My mother's name, my work, my place. Later that evening, the board called an emergency session. They voted to remove Richard, Veronica, and Landon from all positions of authority, effective immediately. Landon was reassigned to a junior analytics role, an entry point almost identical to the one I'd been forced into years ago. Maybe he'd learn what real work felt like. They offered me my mother's seat and the title that came with it. I didn't celebrate. I accepted quietly the way she would have. When I finally returned to Seattle, I made one stop before going home. The hospital room. My room. The machines were gone. The sheets were fresh. But the memory of waking up alone tightened my throat for a moment. This time, though, the room didn't feel empty. I stood by the window watching the overcast sky settle over the city my mother once fought to protect. I did it, Mom, I whispered. I put us back where we belong, and for the first time since she died, I felt her there, steady, proud, unshakable. In the weeks that followed, I learned something my father never understood. Silence isn't weakness. It's the space where truth gathers its strength. I didn't destroy my family. I simply stopped letting them destroy me. And when the dust settled, what remained wasn't revenge, it was restoration. My mother's legacy stood exactly where she intended it to be. If you've ever fought to reclaim something that was yours, tell me in the comments. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.